Welcome to Painting with a Scientist. I am your host, mostly known as Science Mom, but today I'm sporting a fantastic blue wig just to add a little bit of fun and color to our already very blue landscape. Hello to Daniel, Hayden, Sarah, Ben. Good to see you guys here. And I see that some of you are saying that you've got markers and pencils or crayons, and you can definitely use other things beside paint. If you would like to paint alongside me in exploring the domains of life, I have an outline that I'm going to use that you are welcome to use, or you can use marker or pen or pencil or crayon as well. It's all up to you. I today am going to be using a palette that has leftover paint from when I did a scene about Io last week, because waste not, want not. I also have a tube of acrylic paint, a navy blue color that I'll be using, and a container of green Crayola paint that I'll be using as well. And the theme here in my painting lessons is to make do with what you have. We're in unusual times with many of us limiting our trips to the stores, and so whatever materials you have on hand, I say go ahead and use those. Make do with what you have. Hello to Nikki and Katie and Jane. Several people asked if I'm using watercolor. I'm actually using acrylics today, and I'm also using regular plain painting paper, which means it's going to warp a little bit and get a bit wrinkly and add its own personality to our art project today. So again, our theme is making do with what you have, having fun, and exploring more about science. So without further ado, let's get started. Here on our scene, you can see that we have 3 leaves. Each one of these leaves represents one of the domains of life. And because our planet is floating through the wide expanse of space, I'm going to paint our background a dark, dark blue, because I think that sort of feels nice and appropriate. And whenever you're painting, it's always easiest to do the background first and work your way forward. So I'm going to give some nice stripes here on our painting, filling in this blue background. And once I've done this stripe in across the top, then I'm going to outline our leaves. This part is going to be just a little bit trickier to do. And if I make a mistake and go inside my line, I'm not going to worry about that too much, because I can always just sort of incorporate it, and maybe the leaf got bit by an insect there, or maybe it's just part of the overall design. You can take your mistakes and make them into happy accidents. It's a good approach while painting. Now, the first domain of life that we're going to talk about are the single-celled. So we have Archaea over here, and then bacteria, and then Eukarya, which is all of our multi-celled organisms. And again, just in case you're coming in late, the paints I'm using are a mixture of acrylics and then kids' paints from the dollar store. I'm just using whatever I have on hand, and I invite you to do the same. You are welcome to freehand this and just draw the shape of 3 leaves with me, or if you'd like to print out the outline, that is available on Patreon. It's a free download. And I see that, oh, Isaiah says he can't see the paper. You know what? I'll try and bring this a little closer. I'll bring it a little closer, so hopefully you have a better view. And then if I angle down, there we go. Thank you for that suggestion, Isaiah. I think that's a much better view. So I'm outlining my leaves here. And the kind of amazing thing to think about when you're thinking about life is just the variety of what we have. So think of a pool of salty water in the middle of the desert that only appears a couple times a summer when it rains. We have one of these near where I live, because I live in the desert. I live in the middle of the Mojave Desert, and there's a huge basin not far from my house that is dry and dusty almost all of the year. But in the summertime, we will get these rainstorms, and if they dump enough water, that whole basin will fill up with about 3 inches of water. And then it comes to life. You have these tiny little crustaceans called fairy shrimp that grow, and they eat algae and different bacteria that are alive in the mud, and then they lay eggs, and the eggs go dormant until the next rainstorm conditions are right. It might be next year, or it might even be a couple years. It's incredible. So an environment as harsh as that, we can find life. In the pools of Yellowstone, you see the beautiful rainbow colors of bacteria life. All throughout our planet, there are amazing examples of life. And just for fun, I'm going to ask you in the chat, if you happen to be in the chat and be active, I'm going to ask you for some favorite types of bacteria. We're going to start with our single-celled organisms, and I'm curious, does anybody have a favorite single-celled organism? And I'll check the chat in just a minute to see your responses. And if you're busy painting or coloring, or if you're watching the replay and you're not in the chat, don't worry about it. You can take a minute after it's done to tell me what your favorite single-celled organism is in the comments. And now I'll tell you what mine is. My favorite single-celled organism is actually one that we saw earlier today when we were doing quarantine. It's Lactobacillus. Lactobacillus is a really cool bacteria, not only because it's good for our digestion, but also because it has the ability, like a lot of bacteria do, it has the ability to be really, really fast with how it reproduces and how it divides. So if you put a spoonful of yogurt that has lactobacillus cultures into milk, within just a few hours, that spoonful of bacteria can multiply and take over pretty much the whole entire container of milk, which is really cool. Ooh, Ben says algae. Algae is a wonderful type of single-celled organism as well. And we'll be talking about algae a little bit more when we paint our cyanobacteria circle right here. One of my favorite things about algae, aside from the beautiful blue-green color that you get with algae, is just how important they are for oxygen production. Most of the oxygen on our planet actually comes from our oceans, and it's there because of the blue-green algae in our oceans. Finishing up this last bit of our dark blue sky here, and again, I made this dark blue by mixing a little bit of black with blue, and that gave it this nice dark color because I didn't have a real navy blue, so I made my own by mixing black and blue, and you can do the same. A few more strokes up here, and because this is not watercolor paper, it is just regular printer paper, we are getting a nice little wrinkle effect with the paper sort of wrinkling up because it's getting wet, but that's all right. I don't mind that at all. That's just part of our art experience today. There we go. We have our sky all painted in, and now next I'm going to paint the ground here, and then we'll move on to our domains. We'll go Archaea, bacteria, and Eukarya. So I'm going to rinse out my brush, and then I'm going to grab a little bit of brown. And I have some pre-existing brown here from when I did my IO painting. I'm just going to use that and get it wet and draw our soil in down here. One of the things that I think is so neat about soil is that soil is alive with billions of bacteria. But a lot of the bacteria that live in soil, we have not been able to identify because they're specialized to living in this sort of dry, sometimes moist environment. And when we try and put them in petri dishes that are warm and culture them and make them grow out, they don't grow out as well as other types of bacteria do. But from some DNA analysis that has been done on soils, it's estimated that there are millions of bacteria in soil that we still haven't identified. But those bacteria play a really important role for plants. Did you know that if you went to a new planet that did not have any bacteria in the soil and you started planting seeds and tried to grow crops, they would not grow very well? Bacteria and fungi, the different microorganisms in the soil, actually help plants out a lot. There are a lot of really neat relationships where the plant roots kind of give the microbes some nutrients, and then the microbes give the roots nutrients in return, and it's a beautiful It's a beautiful win-win situation for everybody. And now that we have painted our soil and our background, it's time to get some green. And again, I am just using whatever I have, and the green paint that I have happens to be this little Crayola paint that I got from the dollar store. So I'm going to dump that into my palette here. It's rather thick paint. You know what? Maybe I'll just use it from this container. We're going to switch things up. I'm just going to paint directly from here. Get some nice green on my paper, and now here I'm going to try and leave my circles untouched, because in each circle I want to paint something that reminds me of that particular organism. So I'm going to try and just paint around my circles. And I will say this paint has a very different smell than my other paints. The other paints I don't think have a very noticeable smell, but this Crayola one smells kind of like glue. No, I don't know, like Elmer's glue. It reminds me of Elmer's glue. I saw a good question. Hello, Catherine from Georgia. Why am I wearing a wig again? I am just for fun because I'm painting. And I saw a couple people asking where Math Dad is. Math Dad is got my kids up. I have 3 kids, and since we're on the West Coast, it's fairly early still. It is 9:26 right now in the morning, and my kids have gotten in the habit of sleeping in because they would sleep through quarantine and sleep in and stay up late. And we decided that it would be better to get them up a little earlier. That's another reason why dropping quarantine to a 1-hour show is good for us, because now Math Dad is doing some chores and things with my kids while I do the painting lesson with you. So that's where Math Dad is. We might have him make an occasional special appearance if you guys enjoy this painting show and we keep doing it. We might have him do an occasional painting lesson. And then if you did have a favorite microorganism, I saw just a couple things about algae, but if you do have a favorite, feel free to drop it in the chat, because now this leaf and this one, this is the land of the microbes. And let's take a minute and talk just about how cool microorganisms are. So one of the things that we really want to know when we're talking about different life forms is, how do they get their energy? Do they get their energy from sunlight, or do they get their energy from eating food? That's one of the big questions you have when you're looking at a new life form. How does it get its energy? And with bacteria and other microorganisms, it can be both. With plants, they get their energy from the sun. And with all animals, we get our energy from food. We cannot get our energy from the sun. But with bacteria, oh my goodness, you can have both. There is so much variety in the bacteria kingdom and in the Archaea kingdom. And obviously, if I'm picking some circles to highlight here, I couldn't include everything. So I just picked a couple of my favorites to highlight. And now that we have colored in the green for these 2 branches, we're going to pick some colors to use to highlight each of these squares. And real quick, I see that Ben asks, what does heart-loving microbes mean? Oh my goodness. It means I made a typo if it says heart-loving in there. It should say heat-loving. So the first little circle that we'll fill right here is for heat-loving microbes. And those are like the ones that you see in Yellowstone. If you've ever seen a hot spring that has incredible colors with the blue and green on the outside and then going like a rainbow into red, those are heat-loving microbes. And do I like Bob Ross? Lacey asks. I love Bob Ross. David says, I'm going fast. I am going kind of fast. David also says he loves plankton. I love plankton too. Let me rinse off my brush. And once I get my brush rinsed off, then we're going to color. We're going to try and do sort of a rainbow, just like the pools in Yellowstone for our heat-loving microbes, because they really do love hot springs, and they come in so many different colors. And I'm going to clean off my brush real quick. And then we're going to start our little rainbow pool with some deep blue at the outside. Well, actually, you know what? I think I've got it backwards, because when I think of prismatic springs. And if you've never seen Grand Prismatic Spring, it's a beautiful, beautiful, huge hot spring in Yellowstone National Park. And it is actually blue in the middle, not red in the middle. So I was saying it backwards. So we are going to get some blue, but I don't want it to be this deep navy blue that I was using before. So I'm going to put just a little bit of a squirt of the only blue that I have here, which is this blue here. And then if I water it down just a little bit, I think it'll give me sort of a nice turquoisey color. And we're going to paint a nice blue blob in the middle. And now I want to add a little bit of green and do a stripe of green around the edge. And hopefully this will give us sort of a rainbowy-like effect. But if it doesn't, that's all right. It's perfectly okay. A little bit of green. Now, if we only have blue and green, it's not going to look very much like a rainbow. So next I'm going to try and add in some yellow. This is going to be a little trickier. And my yellow paints that I have are my little Crayola paints that smell like blue. So I'm going to open up this container here and dip in and get a good amount of yellow and see if I can make a yellow circle around the edges. And then the last part of my rainbow will be some orange and red. So here is my yellow. Whoop. I kind of contaminated my brush with some green there, but that's all right. We'll just do the best we can. A nice thick yellow border there. Did you know that the yellow and red, those pools up in Yellowstone, they are actually hotter in many places. They're hotter than boiling water. And the fact that you can have bacteria growing in these places that are hotter than boiling water is just amazing. And again, it's the Archaea, these heat-loving microbes. We call them thermophiles. Thermo means heat, and they live in these extreme environments. And the hot springs, I think, is one of my favorite examples. So now we'll do a nice red around the edge. And we're going out of the lines a little, but that's totally okay. There's our representation of our thermophiles, our extreme heat-loving bacteria. And next we have the halophiles, our salt-loving bacteria. And for this one, I actually thought it would be kind of fun to mix some salt with paint, and then when we put it on, it will dry. But it appears I forgot to bring my salt in. But if you have salt at home and you mix salt with your paint, if you mix a lot of salt in and then paint it on, when it dries, you'll get sort of a cool little pattern. So that might be something fun to do for the halophiles. But for this one, what I'm going to do is paint it sort of a purple-red color, because there is a lake not too far north of where I live. Well, too far north. I guess it's about a 8-hour drive north. That's kind of far. There's a lake north of where I live called the Great Salt Lake. And give a little shout out in the chat if anyone is watching from Utah, because if you are, you've seen the Great Salt Lake. And the Great Salt Lake, they have these pools where they dry out the salt. And when they do, sometimes you get these bright purple-orange colors. So if you've ever taken an airplane and flown into Salt Lake City, when you come over the Great Salt Lake, you will see this expanse of water, and then near the edges, you'll see these pools of these bright magenta and purple colors. So I'm going to pick sort of this purpley red color here, and that's going to represent the halophiles, or the salt-loving microbes, because they, when the conditions get just right and it gets super salty, sometimes you'll have a bloom of these salt-loving microbes, and they will be just flourishing in an environment where nothing else can live, which is kind of amazing. And I think that's my favorite thing about Archaea, is that they are organisms of extremes. Manuel says he's from Utah. Cher says from Utah. Awesome. So next time you guys go out to the salt flats, especially in the summer when those evaporation pools are going, this is something cool to check out, because you will see these bright magenta red colors, and it's all caused by Archaea, these microscopic little organisms that are well adapted to living in extreme, extreme conditions. Now we're ready to move on to the bacteria. And I saw that Hayden asked, can I make the circles dark green? You definitely can. This is your painting, and you can paint it any way you want. And if you want to share your painting with me when you finish, you can tag me on social media. I would love to see the artwork that you come up with. But yeah, I'm just giving an example, but you can definitely use your own creativity and do it any way you want. Adam asks what my favorite color is. I think my favorite color is blue, but I love green, I love burgundy, I love turquoise. I like all the colors. Now next, let's talk about the spirochetes. Spirochetes are pretty cool bacteria, and they're bacteria that are very unusual in their shape. They sort of look like slightly curly long noodles. So I'm going to paint the background of our spirochete circle yellow. It looks like I didn't rinse my brush well enough. It's like a slightly yellow orangey color. And I'm going to wait for just a second to dry, because then we're going to paint our spirochetes. And our spirochetes are going to look a little bit like worms. They kind of have this like undulating shape, and they're very long and thin and sort of like a little spiral. That's why they got the name spirochetes. And some of our spirochetes actually cause really bad diseases. I believe, Bree asks, where do we get the daily paper with the fact or fiction answers and what's in the bag? In the description of this video, there's a link to where you can get that paper. And on that same Patreon post, we also have this paper that you can print out. I'm going to blow on my spirochete circle just to dry it a little bit. And then I'm going to use dark blue and dark red. I'm going to try to real quickly make a thin little spirochete. So here's one that's going to be dark blue. I'm going to get my brush nice and wet with paint, and I'm just going to do a squiggle. There's a spirochete, a little squiggle line. Then I'm going to do my next one with a different color just for fun. I'm going to do a little red spirochete. Whoops, that one wasn't quite as thick as I was hoping. And last, we'll do a little brown spirochete. 3 little spirochetes up here, just to help us remember that there are lots of different types of spirochetes and lots of different types of shapes when it comes to bacteria. And then this middle circle is going to be cyanobacteria. And I forget who it was now, but someone mentioned cyanobacteria in the beginning. And cyanobacteria are amazing and so important for planet Earth because they produce oxygen, and they produce a lot of oxygen. So let's grab some light. We're going to take blue and green and mix them together. Try and make just a nice turquoise color. And with this one, I think it would be kind of fun if we did, and I'm sure there's an artistic word for this, but I'm just going to do sort of impressionistic style. I'm just going to go dab, dab, dab with different colors and let it all mix together. So spirochetes, we're going to definitely get some green, but we also have like blue-green algae. Sorry, I just said spirochetes. I meant to say cyanobacteria. Blue-green algae is one of our main types of cyanobacteria, and these blue and green kind of dots all mixed together, I think will give kind of a cool pattern for what our cyanobacteria look like. There was a rather well-known scientist who several years ago said that if the planet got too hot, he could immediately cause an ice age just by dumping a tanker of iron in the ocean. Now, whether or not this would really work is debatable, but the idea behind his theory was that there is the cyanobacteria in the ocean. If you go and just take a sample of water, there aren't going to be tons and tons, because the iron content is fairly low, and iron is what limits how many cyanobacteria you have in the ocean. If you have sunlight and you have nutrients in the water, you'll have what's called an algae bloom, and you'll get tons of them all of a sudden. But out in the open ocean, because the oceans are so big, there are tons of cyanobacteria, but there could be a lot more if we put more nutrients into the ocean, and iron is one of the limiting ones. So if you were able to dump a tanker of iron into the ocean, and here's the big if you were able to make it available to the bacteria on the surface and not have it just sink down, then you actually would get just a huge, huge bloom of bacteria, and it would be so big, it could affect the climate on the planet. So that's sort of a cool random fact for you. Next, we're going to do our gram-positive bacteria. Most bacteria have cell walls. So they have a slightly different membrane than we do around our cells. They have a membrane, but they also have a cell wall. And that's what lets us attack them with antibiotics, because most antibiotics, they attack the cell wall because the bacteria has cell walls, but you don't. So if you have a chemical that breaks up the cell wall, it's going to affect all the bacteria, but it's not going to affect you. And when we're talking about types of bacteria, we have gram-positive and gram-negative. And the gram-positive one, I chose this one mostly just because I wanted a third circle, and I thought it would be sort of fun to just make a little big plus in this circle for the gram-positive bacteria. So we're going to draw a little plus. That's not super plussy, but it works. And I should have taken my advice at the beginning and done the background first, because now drawing around this background is going to be kind of tricky. But you know what I just decided? I think I like the background being white because it reminds me of the Red Cross. And since bacteria can make us sick, gram-positive bacteria sort of combined with the Red Cross symbol actually looks pretty good. So we're going to leave that there. And now we're going to move on to Eukarya, our multicelled organisms. So I'm going to grab my green again, get my green paint ready, and first we're going to fill in our leaf with the green paint here. The variety of life that we have on Earth is really amazing. And if you just think about all the different living things that are more than one cell, the things that you can see, I mean, we have protists that we're going to talk about. Those are one cell. We have slime molds that are like a weird in-between. But then if you think of the variety of plants, you know, the circle here is for all plants. There are so many different types of plants. And then if you think of the variety of fungi, the different mushrooms that we have, sometimes we think of fungi as just being mushrooms, but there are so many different types of fungi. And there are yeast, you know, these small little funguses that don't ever make a mushroom. There's bread mold. Bread mold doesn't really make a mushroom either. It makes these little sort of spore heads. So many different types of mushroom, and a lot of them are really important for plants to grow and be healthy. And then this circle here, animals. Animals includes birds, reptiles, amphibians, mammals, all types of animals. And of course, that's the one that we tend to talk about the most because that's what we are. And that's what most of our pets are, and we care about the animal part a lot. But the animals would not be here if it weren't for the bacteria and the plants, especially. The bacteria and the plants are super important to our planet working. If it weren't for cyanobacteria and plants, we wouldn't have oxygen to breathe. The only way that we can get oxygen is by having plants and cyanobacteria produce it. There's really no other way that we get oxygen in our atmosphere. And thankfully, we've had a long time for the plants and the cyanobacteria to build up a really nice oxygen reserve, and we have an atmosphere with about 20% oxygen. But did you know that there used to be no oxygen in the atmosphere? If we look at the fossil record and we go back billions of years, there was a time where there was no oxygen in the atmosphere, or very, very little oxygen. And then when you had the cyanobacteria first come on the scene, they changed the planet. They changed the climate dramatically by producing oxygen. All right, now that we have our background for our leaf, it is time to color in our circles. And I'm going to start with our protists. And I think for our protists, protist is kind of tricky to say if you're trying to say it fast. Protist. There's a lot of S's and T's. I'm going to try and draw just a little happy single-celled organism here, but I'm going to make him sort of complex and give this little guy some tails. So I'm going to start off with a slightly purple background. Just going to get it nice and light purple and kind of trace around the edges here. And then for our actual protist, I think he would look lovely with some orange and red. But I think I need just a tiny bit more purple there in the center. There we go. One protist that you may have heard of before and that can make you sick is Giardia. Giardia is not a bacteria. It's actually much more complex. It has 2 little nuclei inside it, and it has these tails that help it maneuver in water. Giardia is something that I always heard about growing up because in Utah, where I grew up, if you drink water like outside from a pond or a stream and it's not treated, chances are pretty good you'll get Giardia, because the cattle often carry this little parasite, and then if they urinate or poop near a water stream, the whole entire stream will become contaminated with Giardia. So here is our little head part of our Giardia, the main part of the body, and then he has a whole bunch of tails, and I'm not sure why I'm saying he, because really there's, yeah, it is a better use here. So it has a whole bunch of tails. We'll do a little tail here, a little tail here, a little tail here, and here. So there are my little tails on my protist, which is Giardia. And then we're gonna use this orange, get it a little more wet so that I can give him his 2 nuclei, which look kind of like little eyes. So we'll have one there and one there. And there's our little protist. He looks kind of like some sort of Star Wars inspired spaceship, in my opinion. And next, we are going to move on to slime molds. And I will tell you, I wish I had a little more time to refresh my knowledge about slime molds before this started, but I ran out of time yesterday to look this up. But if you would like a really fun research project, read up about slime molds, because they sort of straddle the line between single-celled and multi-celled. And they're sort of like a colony of individual cells that just got together and decided, hey, let's have a party. They're not really multicellular, they're not single-celled, they're kind of in between. And so for our slime molds, I'm just gonna do a big blob. And you can do whatever you want with your blob, make it any color you want, and make it look weird, because slime molds are really weird, let me tell you. So we're gonna do our blob here in the middle, and then I'm gonna give it a little drip down one side, because slime molds do ooze. They ooze like crazy. And then I'm gonna give it a little bit of we're gonna make it like it has 2 eyeballs. So it looks kind of like a crab now, because sometimes slime molds will actually kind of grow these little structures, which is really cool, especially since they're not very organized. And it's a bit of a mystery to us how they do this. And now, just for fun, because we have a nice red theme here, I'm gonna get some orange and kind of paint in my background. And again, every time I paint what's in the front first, then I think, oh man, it would have been easier if I did my orange background first. But we'll do the best we can. Paint our orange background here around our slime mold. There's a type of slime mold that sometimes grows on decaying wood. So sometimes if you're in the forest, and if you happen to see something that looks really, really weird, like maybe like a huge greenish yellow booger that just got draped over a log, chances are it might be a slime mold. They're really bizarre looking. And they don't fit into any of the other categories, because if it's more than one cell, it's not going to be a protist. And it's definitely not a fungus or an animal or a plant. It deserves its own little category. All right, next, let's do plants. And can I just tell you guys, I love plants. Plants are amazing. Now, since we sort of have this plant theme with our domain, and we've got a lot of green here, I think for the plant part, I'm gonna draw a flower. Not all plants have flowers. And not all plants have flowers like the type that we typically recognize, like a daisy where you have petals. In fact, pine trees, they reproduce with the equivalent of flowers that they have are actually very different. So there's a female and a male cone, and in the springtime, sometimes pine trees will drop an incredible amount of pollen. I'm gonna color that in blue, that's rather dark, and then I'm gonna need to let that dry so that I can paint my flower over it. So while I'm letting that dry, I'm gonna do animals and fungi. And I'm gonna ask you guys in the chat who are watching live, if you have a recommendation for an example animal that we could do. An example animal. So with a fungus, I think we're going to try and do sort of a Minecraft-inspired mushroom. But for an animal, let's see. Ooh, a cat. All right. Thank you, Ben, for the recommendation. We will do a cat. And I'll use some brown for my cat. And I think I'll do a light green background here for the cat. So I'm going to get a little bit more water and then just really lightly sort of brush in my background here. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the fungi. So that when we get to our fungi, we'll be ready. And I'll say real fast too, I did see a message from Science Mom Emily earlier about how accidentally she had blocked someone. And I know about it, and I'm going to go back and get them unblocked. And if that happens to you, if you accidentally get blocked, because especially in the beginning when we were first getting started, Science Mom Liza and Emily and Krista were all sort of getting the hand of how to moderate. And if you've accidentally been blocked and you can't comment, you can email us and we'll get that taken care of. All right, time for a cat. I'll do my best to do a nice cat. So we'll do a round head. And I think what I'm going to do, since this brown is sort of dark, I'll probably wait till it dries, and then with a marker, a Sharpie marker, I'll draw the face on, because that will be easier than trying to paint it on. And some people might think like, hey, that sounds like cheating. But in art, there's no such thing as cheating. There's just creativity and making do with what you have. So there are my ears for my cat. And then we'll do a little body here. And I think this cat looks very content. So I think we'll have his little tail just sort of resting on this other side against the circle. Need to get just a little bit more paint for the tail. There we go. A nice little tail there for our cat. And the ears are going to look much more like cat ears if we put just a little bit of pink on the inside. So very carefully, I'm going to try that. I'm going to get just a little bit of pink here and put a little pink there for the inside of that ear, and then there. Whoop, my paint was a little too wet and is looking a little weird. So I'm going to take a sock, because that's what I happen to have here, and just kind of blot off that and say, whew, that's better. And don't worry, the paint's washable. It'll wash out of the sock. All right. And next, we're going to do our fungi, and then we should be ready after our fungi to do our plant. This is almost completely dry now. So for our fungi, I kind of wish I had some white, but I don't. So instead of like the classic mushroom that has the white spots on the red, we are going to do, let's see, what color should I do, you guys? How about yellow spots on purple? I think that would be kind of fun. We will do yellow spots on purple. So I'm going to get some purple here with my little Crayola paints. And put a little bit in there and mix it around. And then we're going to draw the top part of our mushroom, which is going to be a somewhat fantastical looking mushroom with purple. The amount of variety that we have in terms of colors with mushrooms, though, is really amazing. There are a lot of different types of fungi. The cool thing about mushrooms is that you can think of mushrooms as being like the flower for the fungus, because that's the whole purpose of a mushroom. It's the reproducing part. It's the part that's going to make spores, because mushrooms don't have seeds, they have spores. And the tiny little spores that fly out from underneath a mushroom or from a puffball, that's another type of fungus that has a really cool way of reproducing. Those tiny little spores, they can travel huge, huge distances. And then as soon as they find a good place to start growing again, they'll start growing. And most of a fungus is actually underground. Now we've got our top part of our mushroom, and I will get a little bit of yellow to mix in with my brown, because I want my brown to be just a little bit lighter. And then we'll draw our bottom part. So I'm getting my brown all mixed together, and now We'll draw the little stem part of our mushroom. There we go. Get just a little bit more paint so I can finish off that bottom part. There's our little mushroom, and now all it needs is the polka dots, because I think our mushroom will be very nice with some yellow polka dots on the top. One bit of advice that I once got from a friend of mine who loved identifying mushrooms, because there are some mushrooms that you can pick wild and you can eat, like morels. Morels are one of the most popular mushrooms that people will gather wild. Another type that you might have heard of before are truffles. Truffles are a type of fungus, and they're very, very expensive, and people go and harvest them from the wild. But in general, it is better not to harvest mushrooms from the wild because there are some species that are very, very poisonous. If you are not 100% sure, you should not eat it. Morels are pretty easy and safe because there are no lookalikes to morel mushrooms. Morel mushrooms are really pretty unique. But a lot of the other mushrooms, you got to be super careful with and really know that you know what you're doing, because it's not worth the risk. All right, there is our pink and purple mushroom. And now it's time to do our plant. So I could do something like little four-leaf clovers around the side. That might make a fun border, but I think what I'm going to do is just go for a really nice big flower. So I'm going to do my petals first around the outside, and then we will do the inner part with the yellow. And because I chose blue for my background, my only hope of making this flower visible is if I use really thick paint, because otherwise that blue is going to kind of show through. So I'm going to pick, actually we'll just do purple again. I'm going to take purple and I'm going to try and do some nice thick petals. So here's a petal. Oh man. And now I'm like, why the dollar store paint? Why did I use that? Because unless I like dab it on like this, it just completely kind of fades out and you can't even see it. But that's all right. We'll make do with what we've got. Thick globs of paint for our purple petals coming out. And then we will do a nice big yellow one in the middle for the center of the flower. And that will be our representation of the plant family. There are so many cool types of plants, you guys. Some of you from watching Quarantine, you might know that I did my master's degree in plant science. And I studied this tiny little weed called Arabidopsis. And Arabidopsis is a member of the mustard family. And it has pretty small flowers. But the good thing about Arabidopsis is that its genome, its entire structure of DNA was sequenced. So then it made it a really good research tool to try and figure out what different pieces of DNA in plants did. So that was my research project. But if I had to pick a favorite plant, that's really hard. There are so many different types of plants that I like a lot. I love bamboo for how fast it grows and that it is a grass that is as tall as most trees. I think that's pretty awesome. I love the sequoias in Yellowstone. I think they're some of the most beautiful forests, or not Yellowstone. I can't believe I said Yellowstone. Yosemite and Grand Sequoia National Park in California. Those sequoias are incredible. They would definitely be on my short list for favorite plants. But I have to say, I also just really like ordinary garden flowers. When you think about what's going on with a flower, that here is this structure that the plant has made to attract insects so that then it can be fertilized and have seeds, it's really an amazing thing. And because we live in Nevada, in my yard, I actually have some dragon fruit. So they're a large cactus, and they have these flowers that are enormous. One flower will be about that big, and they only open once at night, and they're open for that one night because they're pollinated by moths that fly at night, and then in the morning, they all kind of collapse down, and then the fruit starts to form. They're really pretty amazing. So here is our painting, The Domains of Life. And I hope that you enjoyed painting along with me. And if you would like, especially if you have some white paint, I think writing the word life up here would make a nice addition to the painting, but I'm gonna have to find some thicker paint because I know with my Crayola paint, That's not quite going to work. But if I go and find some white, I'm going to write life up here because these are the 3 domains of life. And then I'll post a picture online on our Facebook page. And if you want to share your pictures with me, yeah, let me know. And I see Ben's asking, what about the cat? I will definitely add some details to my cat too, because I think a little bit of white with the cat eyes and then a Sharpie marker to draw the little face would definitely make my cat look more realistic. So thank you so much, PC Builders, Adam, King Potato, Daniel. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And Sarah, so happy to have you guys here. I hope you enjoyed this. And I will see you again tomorrow. Tomorrow we will have quarantine again for the first hour. Then there'll be about a 15-minute break and we'll have Painting with the Scientist, and we're doing a cool art project about DNA tomorrow. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you tomorrow.